We spent a lot of time recently talking about different series or trying to organize groups of players into distinct ways just to have a topic for a show, just something to talk about. Well, today we're not going to do that specifically. We're just going to have Matt Lawson on, and I picked out 10 players, and we're just going to talk about them. We're just going to talk about our dynasty viewpoints on 10 players I've picked out. It's mostly guards, so it actually ends up pretty much being a guards episode. But there is one forward and a lot of different point guards and shooting guards. So this is the guards plus Franz Wagner episode, I guess. But we've got 10 players that we're going to talk about, and we'll have Matt Lawson on here, and we'll talk about the seasons they've had, maybe some of the narratives surrounding maybe this upcoming season, or why they haven't been as good in the past, or why we're optimistic or pessimistic about their future. And we're just going to give our dynasty thoughts so that hopefully you will learn something and have a better valuation for these players, so you know how to trade for them or trade them away, or whether or not maybe to just hold them or stay away in your dynasty league, or where to draft them if you're doing a startup. All right, and we have Matt Lawson here joining us. And like I said, we're just going to be talking about 10 players and kind of giving our dynasty thoughts on their outlooks. But before we get into talking about these guys, Matt, how are you? And also, actually, forgot to maybe talk about this before, but Yahoo leagues are now open, and we're looking at redraft leagues. So maybe we can spend a couple minutes. Obviously, this was supposed to be just like a dynasty episode, but now that Yahoo redraft leagues are open, that's also pretty important for everyone out there that's playing fantasy. So how are you? And then what were your early thoughts on the Yahoo rankings?
Yeah, no, I'm doing great. And I'm doing great because we have fantasy basketball in the air. It's happening. Fantasy basketball season has truly begun once Yahoo opens. And, as usual, a lot of wonkiness. If you look at Yahoo's projections that they put out immediately, you get projected ranks that have things like Derek White in the top 10, Casey Wallace in the top 25. If you dig a little bit deeper into kind of like their repackaged, pre-draft rankings, it's not as bad. There's some stuff in there that I don't agree with, but I think, we've seen with them every couple weeks, we're going to get an update that's going to kind of reshuffle things based on how consensus is shaping up. But this is such an important time of the year. Even if you don't play redraft, even if you just play Dynasty, I would say you still need to have a really firm understanding and opinions on where players are headed for just this season. Because I can tell you right now, as someone who's been doing dynasty rankings now for about 5 years, there is nothing more valuable in the dynasty market than how a player is playing right now. And even if your team isn't win now, the way that people in your league are going to value players is going to be based on how they look in that moment, how they look in this current season. There is not going to be the degree of patience that you would expect for a dynasty format where you keep players for their entire careers. People don't have that. So the recency bias of what is happening, not only just this season, but what's happening this week, this month, that's going to end up carrying the day quite a bit. So if you know certain players are, and you believe that certain players are going to have really big 25, 26 seasons, then you should be looking to be able to capitalize on that, whether it's someone that you think is just going to have that short-term value and long-term is a sell, take advantage of that. If you know that breakout is coming, you want to acquire those players now before everyone else figures that out. This is kind of your last moment to be able to acquire some of the guys who are going to be hyped as breakout candidates who already haven't gotten that hype, because a lot of dynasty managers are about to come back into the fold that maybe don't pay as close of attention in the offseason. Now they're going to get back into it. If you've been in a league for a while with some of your buddies, they're going to start figuring out what has changed because they don't really know yet. So if you want to capitalize on that, this is a great time to be able to do it. And I think a lot of what we're going to be discussing today is not only that dynasty outlook long-term, but what does the outlook look like for this season and how is that going to shape their dynasty value?
Yeah, that's what we talk about all the time, right? Is to just only judge a player based on how they're playing right now. It's the best thing we can do in dynasty leagues, of course. But I already had someone in one of my leagues send in the Yahoo pre-ranks with, "Hey guys, Casey Wallace is on the block. We're talking about Yahoo top 25 Casey Wallace here. So if you want him, come get him." And I respect it. I'm just not going to fall for it. But yeah, so we'll move on to talking about these guys. And like you said, we'll talk about the dynasty outlook. We'll also talk about maybe our expectations for this season. The first player we're going to talk about here is Tyrese Maxey. And if we check out our partners at FanDuel, they currently have the 76ers as the sixth best odds to win the Eastern Conference. Ahead of them are the Cavs, Knicks, Magic, Hawks, Pistons, and 76ers. And obviously, if they're going to be able to do that, it's going to require a pretty big season from Tyrese Maxey. So it's really important that we get an idea of how he's going to look so that we get an idea of how good the 76ers are going to be as a team. Obviously, the health of Joel Embiid and Paul George are also pretty big factors here. They're minus odds to make the playoffs, but that could either be really good value or really good value to say they're not going to make the playoffs based on the health of some of these players on their team and how good Tyrese Maxey is going to be. But he's coming off a season where he averaged 26.3 points, 3.3 rebounds, 6.1 assists, 1.8 steals per game, and 3.1 three-pointers per game. Finishes a top 10 player in 9-cat per game value on Basketball Monster. The free throw percentage was great. The turnovers were really good for a player that had the ball as much as him. And the field goal percentage it's whatever, same as the blocks. But coming off the best season of his career, what are your expectations for Maxey this year? And is it going to be more of what we saw? I think it slowed down a little bit second half of the year, but also he was in and out of the lineup. Are we expecting him to be like all in this year?
I think this is a really interesting question in fantasy this year, because if you go by kind of the preseason projections that we're seeing from outlets like Basketball Monster, the expectation seems to be Joel Embiid, maybe you're getting half the season at best. You know, the projections around, I think hashtag has him at 37 games, Embiid. Basketball Monster, I think, has him around 45. So we're talking about half of the season where you have Embiid playing alongside Maxey, half where you don't. And we've seen in the last couple of seasons a pretty big split in what Tyrese Maxey's production looks like with Embiid on the floor and without Embiid on the floor. Scoring is way up without Embiid. Per 75 possessions, Maxey averaged only about 20 points per game with Joel on the court last year, and he averaged 27.3 points per game with them off of the court per 75 possessions. So that's a 7-point per game leap, about as big as you would ever see from a player. And that it's a substantial number of games as well where we saw that. So if you look at hashtag's projections for the season, they have Maxey coming in at number 13 per game, 27 points per game. They're expecting a big Tyrese Maxey offensive season, even bigger than last season, largely because we're not going to see a lot of Joel Embiid. Basketball Monster, Josh Lloyd's projections are a little bit lower on that, but they're still expecting him to be able to lead the league in minutes played this year. I mean, he was up around 38 last year. I'd expect Nick Nurse to be doing that again. You saw that Nick Nurse defense steal production pop last season from Tyrese Maxey, which really buoyed his fantasy game, pushed him up significantly in that category, and I think you should expect that to continue this year. But the big thing that we saw last year was the efficiency dip without Embiid. Last year, Maxey was 21 percentage points worse at the rim with Embiid off of the floor. So the attraction, the gravity of Joel Embiid put a lot more attention on Tyrese Maxey, made it a lot more difficult for him to be able to score at the rim. I think that's something that we're going to need to watch out for this year. Can Tyrese Maxey make a leap forward in efficiency without Joel Embiid on the floor? We didn't see that last year, even if the production was still good. The efficiency wasn't. Maybe he'll make that step forward this year. I think he's a consensus top 25 Dynasty League asset for me, and it seems for other Dynasty analysts, either whether Joel Embiid is in the lineup or not. I'm not anticipating Embiid to be super available this year. I think it's going to be a struggle for him to be able to stay on the court throughout the rest of his career. But regardless, I think Tyrese Maxey is a long-term, strong Dynasty asset that you can build your team around.
For sure. And you mentioned the issues finishing at the rim. The overall field goal percentage went down, was the worst of his career at 43.7%. It was the best 9-cat finish of his career, but the steals really kind of buoyed up to 1.8 after it being a career high of 1 per game the year before. So with that being a pretty volatile stat, maybe that does kind of fall back down to earth a little bit this upcoming season. But maybe also the field goal percentage can even itself out and get back to a better than 43.7%. I have him ranked 19th in my rankings. So yes, I agree with the top 25 kind of consensus there on Tyrese Maxey. Moving on to the next player we'll talk about, which is Franz Wagner of the Orlando Magic, who had an excellent start to last season with Paolo Banchero getting injured pretty quickly into the season. I believe it was like 5 games, and that stretch before, like after Paolo got hurt, before Franz got hurt, was an all-star caliber player. Like Franz looked incredible, and then he got hurt, same injury as Paolo Banchero, which was pretty ironic. And then when he came back and was having to share the floor with Paolo, the numbers dwindled down a little bit. Not terribly, not as much as it was, before, where it felt muted. But what type of Franz can we expect moving forward? Like, is his ceiling that diminished by playing alongside Paolo, or do we think he can still play and provide all-star level production? Then how does introducing Desmond Bane into this impact Franz as well? Are we expecting some sort of major statistical regression, or is it still, hey, Franz Wagner is still better than Desmond Bane, so no, we're not worried about that, but that's just going to help the team?
The Orlando Magic present one of the biggest fantasy questions of the season going into the season because of the addition of Desmond Bane and the finally getting to see, hopefully, all of Paolo Banchero, Jalen Suggs, and Franz Wagner out there with Desmond Bane. All three of those guys were out of the lineup at various points in the Magic season last year. And to kind of piggyback off of what you said with Franz, it's staggering to be able to see how good he is without Paolo on the court versus, what he is, still a very good player with Paolo on. Last year, in 1,000 minutes without Paolo Banchero on the floor, Franz Wagner averaged almost 30 points per game per 75 possessions without Paolo on the court. And that dropped down dramatically with Paolo out there. So almost a 30 point per game per 75 possession player without Paolo. And you also saw the assists jump dramatically from 3.7 per 75 possessions to 6.7. So we're talking about becoming not just a all-star level player without Paolo on the court, but an all-NBA level player without Paolo on the court. And that is even with the three-point shot not really falling last season and still continuing to be super inconsistent, despite him being one of the best free throw shooters in the NBA. So now you add in Desmond Bane. And this is super interesting because Josh Lloyd, in his basketball monster projections, has clearly taken the position that he thinks Franz Wagner is going to take a pretty substantial hit with Desmond Bane coming onto this team. He's got Franz at number 57 per game this year, still playing about 34 minutes per night. The efficiency still being really strong, but down to 28.8 points per game and only 3.8 assists, and kind of just having a more muted production, down to 16.7 shots per game. Versus at hashtag basketball, Joey Mamone is looking at it being a number 32 per game fantasy season a big 25 slot difference from basketball monster, having Franz up at 22.6 points per game, 4.5 assists. So kind of more of a Franz season that we would be expecting. I lean a little bit more toward the hashtag basketball side. I think Jalen Suggs is going to be taking the biggest hit here, especially compared to what the kind of usage that he had last season when, he had stretches where he was the only regular starter between kind of these star players that was available for the Magic when both Paolo and Franz were out. It's going to be a big hit to Jalen Suggs. I think he's going to be a pretty low usage player. I think he's going to be pretty much focused on being, a defensive stopper on the perimeter. And I think Bane is going to be a little bit more muted as well. His role here is really going to be able to provide the knockdown shooting and spacing that's going to be created wide, pretty open threes that, having two guys who drive as well as Paolo and Franz, especially Franz, do. I think that Bane is going to be a little bit more muted. He's already used to being a number 3 option in an offense, coming from an offense with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. last year, where Desmond Bane was kind of a decisive number 3 as far as usage amongst those guys. And I just think Franz is really good. And I've had that position since he was a rookie. I was really high on him in rookie drafts that year because of his fantasy projections. That bore fruit immediately. And I think he's chronically underrated because people don't understand what kind of player that he is. And the 3-point shooting has kind of made people feel like, oh, well, he's not going to be a shooter, so he can't be that great. The drives per game are star level. The ability to be able to draw fouls is star level. The two-way play is star level. I think Franz Wagner is going to be an all-star this year. I think the Magic are going to be really good. And while it might be a little bit more of a muted usage season, or at least maybe a slight reduction compared to what it was last season, I don't think it's going to be dramatic. I think the overall production line could end up being boosted by the fact that he starts to shoot the three a little bit better this year. I do think that's going to happen at a certain point. Players who hit free throws at this level usually figure it out from outside. I think Franz will as well. And I'm looking forward to another really strong season from Franz Wagner.
Yeah, how do you, view Franz Wagner? Is actually a pretty nice litmus test, I feel like, because there are people that maybe do not view him as highly as some of us do. And I do really like Franz Wagner as well. I have him 22 in my Dynasty rankings. He averaged, just to read it out, 24.2 points, 5.7 rebounds, 4.7 assists, 1.3 steals, 1.7 threes per game. I agree. I think the usage will take a hit. It was very high last year, the highest of his career. But I also think adding Desmond Bane makes life a little bit easier for both Franz and Paolo Banchero. The sense that Desmond Bane is going to be the best shooter that either of them have played with in the NBA. I think maybe there's someone that was a better shooter that didn't play significantly within the last couple of years, but a big improvement over what KCP was able to provide last year and what Jalen Suggs and Wendell Carter have been. Like, they're guys that can shoot the ball, but they're not nearly the level that Desmond Bane is. So that's going to create, more driving lanes for Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. So maybe it is lower usage, more efficient. So that's kind of what I'm expecting. I think he's an all-star talent. I'm just hoping that the usage is there enough for that to actually happen. And in the Eastern Conference this year, if it doesn't happen, then that might be almost a little bit concerning. Moving on to the next player, which will be Darius Garland, who I think kind of falls into that Cleveland duo thing that they have two of, where it's like there's two guys that are kind of taking a little bit of fantasy opportunity away from the other, in the sense that Evan Mobley's having to split with Jared Allen and Darius Garland is having to split with Donovan Mitchell, not minutes, but touches. And I still think Darius Garland is a phenomenal talent. I have him 27th in my Dynasty rankings. But I do question, what does his future look like? Are they going to, like, if they have enough success this year, is Darius Garland just going to be paired with Donovan Mitchell for years to come? Like, if they're able to make it to the Eastern Conference or NBA Finals, or if it doesn't go as well, do we see one of them get moved this season? And then if it's Darius Garland that's moved, where does he end up and how does that impact things? Which obviously those aren't things that we can project, but how do we view Darius Garland's ceiling, or how do you view Darius Garland's ceiling?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting questions with Darius Garland because he's probably a stay away in redraft this year, but I think a buy in Dynasty and kind of a buy low for what we're likely to see this season. We just got the report a few weeks back that Garland, because he had the surgery on his toe, is not going to be ready for training camp. They do not expect him to be ready. Kenny Atkinson is saying they're going to take it slow with him. I think that's likely the right choice for a team that what matters this year is how far they get in the playoffs. This is a team that should make the Eastern Conference Finals this year. I think they're going to be projected for 60-plus wins again. And this is going to be a team that is going to take their time with Garland because they don't need to have Darius Garland out there to be able to be productive in the regular season. So if you're in a redraft league, I'm not really looking to be able to draft Garland, what his ADP is likely to be. But this could be an opportunity to be able to pry him away because long-term, I fully believe in Garland, in both a team with Donovan Mitchell and a team without him. And I think we will probably see both versions of Garland in the rest of his prime because this unit, this in Cleveland with Garland and Mitchell is kind of the backcourt. We'll see how long it can last. If they do make the Eastern Conference Finals, they probably keep it together. If they don't, that could be the point where it breaks up. And if Garland does get traded, he's going to be a all-star level starting guard for someone else. And he's going to get probably more opportunity than he does in Cleveland. And we saw last year, once he was back from having his face broken in the prior season, that he came back in about as strong a fashion as you could have expected. You saw Donovan Mitchell take a little bit of a back seat in his role and his minutes last year, and that allowed Garland to be able to step forward, Garland to have the ball in his hands a little bit more. And this is a team that needs Garland and his handle because you saw in the playoffs, once Garland wasn't really himself and he was dealing with this toe issue, they didn't really have anybody else who could handle the ball, and it became a really big issue for them in the playoffs. I think Garland survives here. I wouldn't be surprised if in the long run it would be moving on from Mitchell. I know that goes a little bit against popular consensus that Garland would be the one to be able to be moved, but I think there is even more to Darius Garland in the future in a larger role. We saw that before Mitchell came in as a really young player. One of his best fantasy seasons for Garland was before Mitchell was on the team, and that was even before his prime had really started in him kind of reaching his peak as a player, which I think we're really only entering now. For a guy who is only 25 years old. This is really kind of the start of Darius Garland's prime, which is hard to believe because we've had him in our lives for so long already. He's been productive for so many years already. We haven't seen his best fantasy seasons yet. That's why he's a buy for me. There's a lot of consensus around him. He's a top 30 consensus player. I have him at number 30 in my rankings. And in a world where there just aren't that many guards that I think you can really believe in long term, because they have shooting issues, because they have injury issues, because they have defensive issues. I mean, Garland does have some defensive issues, but I do think in the long run you could still build a team around him. And I expect that we're going to have a run for him in his late 20s where he could be a standard league first round kind of talent. I think he has that kind of ceiling. So if there is an opportunity this year with Garland kind of starting the year slow, not, playing on opening night, kind of being eased in November, I think that could be a really good buying opportunity for a player whose best days I think are yet to come.
I think it's just like almost like a callback to something you said right at the beginning of the show about how in your Dynasty League, players will be valued based on what they're doing right now. And I think it's almost kind of funny how the NBA sometimes operates the same way, even though people or teams should be able to project, hey, Darius Garland is going to be very, very, very good. Say that this toe injury does kind of linger into this upcoming season, and he misses a good bit of time, or he just struggles a little bit and he doesn't have the season that we're hoping for. That could impact his trade value. It could impact whether Cleveland wants to keep him or Donovan Mitchell, because if Donovan Mitchell's having a really good season, it's like you don't trade him after that. It's just interesting how that all ends up happening, but I would agree that Darius Garland has a very bright future. Hopefully some slow start to the season because the injury doesn't just kind of snowball into just a rough season overall for him, because we know how productive he can be when he's healthy. He averaged 20.6 points, 2.9 rebounds, 6.7 assists, 1.2 steals, and 2.8 threes per game last season. All right. The next player that we're going to talk about is a guy who just got a massive, massive contract. And I was a little bit surprised, and maybe you disagree with this, but I was surprised at how much of an outrage there was over De'Aaron Fox's contract. There was immediately so many people saying, oh, this is the worst contract in the NBA, or like, oh, there's no way he deserves this. It's such an overpay. But I feel like De'Aaron Fox is really good. And I feel like that this team is going to be very good because he's on this team. Like, they would be better this year. I think they'd be in contention for a postseason spot just off of development of their younger guys. But I feel like because De'Aaron Fox is on this team, they're going to be in contention to avoid the play-in tournament altogether if they're able to stay healthy. And I have him 36th in my Dynasty rankings. It's a touch lower than a lot of the other guards that are within the same, I guess, age range as him. But he's really good. So am I missing something? Or am I in the wrong on this? Like, am I overrating De'Aaron Fox?
I think that De'Aaron Fox, we got a little bit tired of what we saw from him in Sacramento. It at least got boring to people. And this happens in fantasy. It happens in Dynasty, where players kind of get this point where they're like in their late 20s. Fox is going to be turning 28, near the beginning of this season. And I think in December. And you suddenly start to see people just kind of get tired because they know what a guy does. We know what De'Aaron Fox does. And occasionally the three-point shooting gets a little bit better. Last year, the free throw shooting got a little bit better. And I think that, there just isn't a whole lot left to be uncovered with him in most people's eyes. But let me pitch for you that I think there is something coming, and it's the pairing with Victor Wembanyama. And yes, it was a small sample size last year. They only played 120 minutes together last season. But in those 120 minutes, De'Aaron Fox had a massive jump in his efficiency at the rim playing with Victor Wembanyama. And I think there's a very good reason for that. He was shooting 68.8% at the rim in minutes with Wembanyama last season, dropped down to about 60% with Wembanyama off of the court as a Spur last year. And I think that's because this could be one of the most explosive pick and roll, pick and pop combinations in the NBA. If you can get De'Aaron Fox the kind of space that I think Victor Wembanyama can get him on a screen because of the gravity and attention that Victor Wembanyama takes up on the court, he's going to be downhill in a flash, even with like slightly decreased athleticism compared to what he started at in his career, where he was, I think, literally the fastest player in the NBA. He's still pretty close to that, and he can get to the rim in an instant, especially if he gets a step on you, which I think he's going to be able to do in that pick and roll combination with Wembanyama. So I expect this to maybe be De'Aaron Fox's best season. I love him from a redraft perspective, but that is not the consensus opinion right now. Josh Lloyd, a basketball monster, has De'Aaron Fox at number 59 per game. He sees him at only 18.9 points per game, only 6.5 assists. And I think that is probably underselling, and hashtag basketball is kind of the opposite direction. So the number 25 per game for Fox, 23.9 points per game. This is a huge difference in expected fantasy output. I would lean more toward the hashtag basketball side just because I think the combination with Wembanyama is going to be so good. And I think it's really going to play well for Fox and kind of bring out the best characteristics of his game and his play to his strengths. He's never really had anything quite like this because no one has really played with anyone quite like Victor Wembanyama before, but I can see that being an incredible combination. He's going to get a lot of opportunity on this team. I get that there's some concern about, there's Stephen Castle there, there's Dylan Harper. I think those guys are kind of separately going to be figuring out who's going to be getting the most opportunity beyond Fox in the backcourt. And you're going to have Fox have a pretty strong and established role. And at least the projections do see that. I mean, hashtag has him at 35 minutes per game. Josh has him at 34. This is going to be a big role. I think he's going to be really productive and efficient in it. I've got him at number 28 in my Dynasty rankings. And I think he's a guy, even if the Spurs decided, you know what, Dylan Harper's way too good, we need to move on from Fox, they're going to be able to do that. I think he's going to have such a good season that they're going to be able to still trade him on this contract. I get it's a lot of money for a guy who's not always going to be an all-star every single year, and giving those kinds of guys money, people are having PTSD from the Bradley Beals of the world to be able to say, well, if a guy's kind of like a borderline all-star, should you really be giving him max money? Should you be giving him that kind of deal? I think they'd still be able to trade him. I think they'd be able to add something that fits their roster construction better long-term. And I think that's ultimately where this heads, because I also believe in Dylan Harper. But for this season, De'Aaron Fox is going to be great. If you have De'Aaron Fox and you have a contending team, this is an excellent opportunity to be able to take advantage of him in the perfect scenario, playing with Victor Wembanyama. I'm really excited about what we're going to get from him in the short term and the long term.
Yeah, just looking at his 17 games with the Spurs last year, he averaged 19.7 points, 4.3 rebounds, 6.8 assists, 1.5 steals. Poor shooting splits, just comparison to the last couple of years. But like you said, there's only a couple of those games that he was playing with Wemby at all. The first game that he played as a Spur, he had 13 assists. So like maybe we see him have his best passing season as well, just off the sense that it's kind of easy to pass the ball to Victor Wembanyama at the rim and let him put the ball in the rim. It works pretty well. It's a pretty good method. So maybe we see him finish at the rim better like he did alongside Wemby. The free throw percentage, hopefully that sticks, because it was kind of a like really poor part of his game prior to this past season, but then it was actually really good this past year. We've seen the threes take a nice uptick in the past. So we'll see. Maybe De'Aaron Fox is able to bring out something new this upcoming season and help the Spurs return to the postseason. The next player that I have is a guy I have 56th in my Dynasty rankings, and I think is kind of an interesting player to try and value right now, and that's Jordan Poole, who had a subpar first year in Washington, was a little bit better last year, and now he's with New Orleans in this nice, we'll call it a hodgepodge of talent, because it's just like all these players that I don't know exactly how it's all going to fit together. And I don't know if this team is going to be any good, but they have a lot of players that I think are good at basketball. And with DeJounte Murray out to start the year, Jeremiah Fears a work in progress because he is a rookie point guard. Jordan Poole's going to have the ball in his hands early and often. No more CJ McCollum there. So it's going to be Jordan Poole's offense to run, and then Zion will have the ball plenty when he's healthy. What are your expectations for Jordan Poole? Do you think this is a year that he can improve his dynasty value even more?
I think that this is the big off-ramp for you if you have endured and enjoyed and suffered through the Jordan Poole roller coaster over the last 6 years of his career. If you got him at the beginning, boy, you felt like you knocked it out of the park. A late first-round pick, a little bit surprising to be picked where he was in the 2019 NBA draft by the Golden State Warriors. But immediately you saw a guy playing 22 minutes a night, super productive, and you felt like you had something. And Golden State did too. By his third season, we're talking about a guy who's starting 50-plus games for them, playing 30 minutes a night, night, shoots pretty well from three from that season, and is averaging 18.5 points per game. He looks like a future part of what Golden State is putting together. Kind of the pool party lineups are all the rage. We're talking about him as a part of that second timeline for Golden State that they're going to be able to bridge into the future, even after their aging legends are out of the picture. And then it kind of all comes to a crashing halt around the punch with Draymond Green, the loss of confidence that we see from Poole, him getting traded to the Washington Wizards, really struggling in that first season with Washington until Brian Keefe comes in near the end of the year as an interim coach, gives Poole the ball a little bit more, rebuilds his confidence, and we see the flashes of what we saw last year, which was a much better version of Jordan Poole. He went from being one of the worst players in the NBA, definitely one of the worst watches in the NBA, to be able to see some of the things that he was doing in his first season in Washington, to being a guy who I thought was actually like a pretty good starting NBA guard last season for the Washington Wizards. So this season, I think we've seen Poole kind of top out at 30 minutes per game. I think he can jump up to 32, 33 this year in New Orleans, because there are just so few guys who can both shoot, handle the ball, and just kind of like functionally play in an NBA offense on this team around Zion Williamson. They're going to need Jordan Poole to play and shoot a lot of three-pointers, at least space the floor a little bit for them, because other than Trey Murphy, there's not a lot here that can play big minutes and consistently shoot threes at volume. That's really it. That's the end of the list. It would be great if Jordan Hawkins could play big minutes. We just haven't seen that yet, and I don't think we're going to. Jeremiah Fears is going to be a teenager playing in the NBA, and he can't shoot the three. So they're going to give him some developmental minutes. But again, this is a team that does not own their first-round pick, that is going to have no incentive to tank, that is going to be trying to win all year. Jordan Poole is going to be looking to be able to get his stats, to be able to get his next contract, and after this following season, because he's still got 1 year left on this deal, I think Jordan Poole is going to be in line for a really big, productive season, especially if you see those minutes tick up a little bit from where they've been. And there's just so much opportunity because this guard room is so barren. For me, I'm a little more aligned with what Josh Lloyd is projecting this season. He's got Poole at number 64 per game, and obviously the efficiency is going to hurt you, but getting around 19 points per game, getting you a little over 4 assists, 1.2 steals, really good free throw percentage that can be impactful. I think this could be a really strong season, and that means it's time to get out, guys. Because I'll tell you what, right now, Jordan Poole, you're seeing his archetype, the scoring guard who gives limited playmaking. The NBA doesn't value this anymore. The NBA isn't going to pay for this anymore. And these guys aren't going to be able to have consistent roles and big minutes going forward. He's getting that on this team out of necessity. And because Troy Weaver decided that it made sense to trade CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole with 2 years left on his deal where he's overpaid. But he's not going to get that going forward. And if you think that you're going to be able to just continue to carry on this, maybe one more season you get it. But even that, I think, is doubtful. You're going to have DeJounte Murray coming back maybe late this season. I think more likely in the 26-27 season. He's still going to be under contract. Get off of Jordan Poole if you were in Dynasty. This is the moment to be able to do it. He's going to be productive. He's going to be available. He's going to be putting up stats. That's when you trade him, get something more sustainable for the long term.
Yeah, we'll be definitely looking at a nice sell high scenario with Jordan Poole. I don't think anybody would be, I mean, maybe some people are nice believers in what Troy Weaver is building in New Orleans and that Jordan Poole is going to be an important part of that future. I just think you would agree with me that we're not super optimistic about the future of the Pelicans, the future of Jordan Poole. I think he definitely can still be a productive player, but like you said, he's not going to get the opportunity or the contract that he was able to get after helping Golden State win a championship. But there should be a ton of threes this year, decent amount of assists, decent amount of steals, decent amount of points, just because New Orleans has nobody else to do those things. And I don't think, as much as Trey Murphy can shoot the ball, I don't think Herb Jones is going to become a high volume 3-point shooter this year. So yeah, it's the stars are aligning though for a nice Jordan Poole season. Moving on, the next player that we have on the list is another guard, another smaller guard who I think a lot of us were expecting big things from last year, and then injuries kind of derailed that. And that is Immanuel Quickley, who is with the Raptors and will be, I'm assuming, their starting point guard this year, and had some nice flashes last year, but just wasn't able to play very many games. Are you expecting Immanuel Quickley to finally have that breakout season?
So last year, Immanuel Quickley was one of the guys that I kind of had pegged as a breakout player. I thought he was going to have a really big role in Toronto. I thought that, from a fantasy stats set perspective, this is a guy who could give you a top 50 season at his peak as a starting point guard. And it was just one of those years where you can just look at the game log and see how frustrating it was to roster Immanuel Quickley, because he starts the season and he is out in the first game within 14 minutes. And then, you have a stretch of him being inactive. He's back. He's playing minutes in the mid-20s for a couple of games. He's out again. He's inactive all the way through December, comes back in January, starts to ramp up. The production is there, and he gets hurt again. And then suddenly we're talking about getting into February post All-Star break. And even though they're ramping him up and trying to get him up to those 30-plus minutes a night that you'd expect him to play, they're yanking his minutes around because the Raptors are realizing that the season isn't going anywhere. They're pulling all their starters in fourth quarters and games that they're competing in just so they can lose. It gets really ugly. And I get it. If you rostered Immanuel Quickley last year expecting that breakout season, and a lot of us projected it, you're upset. You probably would say never again. Maybe you already traded him. I would say we weren't wrong here. We were just early. I'm expecting Immanuel Quickley to have a really good season this year. Basketball Monster has him projected at number 62 per game. I agree with the projections that Josh has there. I think that this is a guy who's going to be able to score points up around 18 points per game. He could hit almost 3 threes a game. He's going to get you 6+ assists per game. And the free throw percentage is going to be really strong. And it's going to help you in that category as well. And for people who are looking at this and saying, but Matt, Brandon Ingram is coming in. I get that. And Brandon Ingram is going to have some playmaking responsibility on this team. So is Scotty Barnes. But Immanuel Quickley is the only player who can really play off ball and be a shooter and space the floor for everyone else on this team. Brandon Ingram doesn't like to shoot threes. They can never convince him to do it for very long. Scotty Barnes can't shoot threes yet. RJ Barrett isn't going to shoot the three, and RJ Barrett's going to take the biggest hit from Brandon Ingram coming in. And you're certainly not going to get 3-point shooting or spacing from Jakob Poeltl. So we're really in a position now where maybe there's some guys on the bench who can shoot it a little bit, because the Raptors have realized to some extent that they're just loaded with big non-shooters. They are going to have to play Immanuel Quickley in a pretty sizable role. So even if he doesn't always have the ball in his hands as kind of the primary initiator of offense, even if some of that goes to Scotty Barnes and Brandon Ingram, and they're kind of spreading that around, he's still going to need to be taking threes and being a big part of this offense. I think he can be that big part of it. I think this is a bounce-back season. Last year was snake bitten, but I think the opportunity is there this year. And I've been looking to invest in him because a lot of people are frustrated. I think that there's the consensus on him is all over the place from a dynasty perspective, because I think a lot of people just kind of look at his career overall and they say, well, this guy's never really put up a season the way that we're ranking him in dynasty. And I think there's a belief that, okay, well, maybe this isn't going to happen for Immanuel Quickley. I think this is that breakout season that we were supposed to get last year. I'm looking forward to be able to see him in a Raptors uniform on this team that I know people aren't that excited about. They don't understand the construction of it. I don't either. But for fantasy, that's not what matters. It's the opportunity that he's going to have on this team and this team going forward. I like both of those things for Quickley, both this year and beyond. And he's definitely one of those dynasty buy lows that I'd be looking to target before this season gets started.
Yeah, I think the team fit is the most interesting thing. They added Colin Murray-Boyles in the draft this year just because they couldn't have enough non-shooters. But I guess the couple of years before that, they had added Jacoby Walter and Grady Dick. So maybe that's where they're going to get the most of their other shooting from outside of Immanuel Quickley. But I'm not – I guess I'm a little bit more pessimistic on Quickley. I still really think he's a very nice talent. I have him 72nd in my dynasty rankings. But just the fact that the way that this team is constructed, like it's – Scotty Barnes is going to have the ball. Brandon Ingram's going to have the ball. RJ Barrett's going to have the ball. But you said like Quickley is probably the best off-ball option. So like maybe he doesn't reach the amount of assists per game that he's able to, though when he was able to play down the stretch of last year where they were kind of alternating games with good players because they figured maybe that's a good way to lose games is to only play half of our good players one game and the other half the next game. He had a few games with 7, 8, 9 assists. So maybe we will see that. I think that there's definitely a recipe for it to not work out because like Brandon Ingram wasn't available for any of those games. And his best season in New Orleans was when they were able to get him to shoot threes. And then he kind of got tired of that and was like, no, just mid-range shots. And then his value tanked. Maybe we'll see a recommitment to that because it's kind of like a, hey, you need to shoot threes or this thing is not going to work. So maybe that'll help Brandon Ingram. Maybe that'll also help Immanuel Quickley. All right, we've got a few more players to talk about, starting with Rob Dillingham in Minnesota, who is coming off not a bad rookie year, but just kind of one where he didn't play all that much. Only played in 49 games at 10.5 minutes per game. He had a few games where he was able to play a larger role and showed some nice flashes. Are you kind of, I guess, lower on Rob after his rookie year than you were heading into his rookie season, or do you still hold a good bit of optimism about the outlook of his career?
Yeah, I think this is kind of an interesting juxtaposition with Immanuel Quickley, because, obviously we're talking about Kentucky guards, kind of coming into the league, being thought of as more of like combo guards. Is it going to, are they going to be able to shoot well enough to be able to stay in the court? Are they going to be able to play defense well enough to stay on the court? With Rob, the summer league experience that we had, the rookie season experience that we had, very mixed. I think that the big question for me is, can he thread the needle that it seems like it's becoming increasingly difficult for smaller players to be able to thread the needle in the NBA? It's really hard to be a small guard and make it in the NBA. You have to be so good offensively, so good as a shooter. And you either have to be like Immanuel Quickley and be able to hold up defensively the way that he showed that he could in New York to be able to make it, or you need to be able to be, someone who can score at all three levels, and you just kind of take the lumps on defense and deal with the fact that you're probably going to get targeted and be a liability. Now, there's huge organizational investment in Rob Dillingham. They gave up part of their future to be able to get him in that trade with San Antonio to move up in the draft. They basically put a marker on him to be able to say, when Mike Conley is gone, this is the guy. We want him in the backcourt with Anthony Edwards. We think it's going to be able to work. And you can kind of understand why, in the sense that Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels can both be plus defenders. They think long-term that they can replace Gobert, maybe with Johan Berenger, that they're going to be able to have this like big athletic team around Rob Dillingham. So maybe something similar to what the Atlanta Hawks do with Trae Young. They're going to be able to have enough size around a guy like this that it's not going to matter that he's going to get targeted, because the rest of the defense is going to be able to be really big positionally and going to be able to hold up in that kind of environment. And I can still see that being the case. But the reason that I have some pause is that obviously Rob, in his rookie season in Vegas Summer League, didn't look like he was going to be ready to make the leap this season to being a starter, to taking the job from Mike Conley, even at points when Mike Conley looked like we were nearing the end. And all the projections are kind of agreeing that, yeah, he's probably going to play every night, but it's probably going to be a role where he's playing around 17 to 19 minutes per game. And, it's not really looking like he's going to be able to take hold of something larger in this rotation. I think their hope in Minnesota is that this year is the year where he's able to cement himself as a winning rotation player that is helpful when he's on the court for the Timberwolves, able to provide some scoring off of the bench, especially in the non-Anthony Edwards minutes for this team, that maybe he's able to kind of cobble together and supplant some of the loss that they have of losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker along with Terrence Shannon Jr. And I could see that. I still believe in that. And I still think that there are really high-end outcomes for Rob, but he is definitely one of the players that I view as both really high ceiling, really low floor going forward. And it's kind of similar to someone like Reed Shepherd as well, where, I like Reed's fantasy game more than Rob's, but as far as guys who are a little bit smaller guard, going to need to shoot really well to be able to make it, going to have to find a way to at least be competitive defensively to be able to stay on the court in big minutes. There are really important questions to be able to answer this season. And our homework for watching Rob Dillingham this year is going to be able to see, can he shoot it? Can he make the offense better when he's on the court in his minutes? And is he at least being competitive enough defensively that he isn't just a total liability on that end? Those are the things that we need to be able to watch for him, because I don't think it's going to be the breakout season. And that means for Dynasty, if you believe in Rob Dillingham, if we're seeing those flashes during the season, the minutes are still going to be low unless Mike Conley is unavailable. And even then, they might try to patchwork their way around not putting Rob into huge minutes the same way that they did last year. I think that you look for those flashes, and that's where you make your investment in him. And we're going to be with you to be able to talk about that if we're seeing that before kind of everyone sees it. It's easy to see a breakout when it's right in front of your eyes. What we're going to try to do during this season is to be able to spot those breakouts before they're happening in lesser minutes, to be able to see the statistical trends that are indicating a breakout is happening for a player, so you can swoop in before the big box score stats are there that are going to warn the manager who rosters a player like Rob Dillingham. Oh, no, this guy's broken out. I'm not going to give him up for cheap the way that I would have a few weeks ago. I think that's going to be a really pivotal moment for Rob Dillingham. I don't expect the breakout this year, but we need to see the flashes of it, because with all of these young guards, you usually start to see a little bit of it. It doesn't just happen a 180 flip overnight.
Yeah, and usually these young guards do take a good bit of time to figure it out. So Hopefully it'll happen at some point this year. I'm sure Minnesota is hoping that it happens at some point this year. They do have a handful of elite defenders, so that maybe things are a little bit better when Rob Dillingham is out there. If he is attacked on defense, you have Anthony Edwards, you have Jade McDaniels, you have Rudy Gobert, and then hopefully one day you have Johan Berenger back there to help out for when Rob Dillingham is getting attacked, or he can just improve. Watching him in Summer League, the shiftiness, the shot creation was insane. It was just unreal, but wasn't always able to finish the play, or he turned it over after. So there was a lot to like, but also definitely a lot of things that he needs to clean up. The next player that we can talk about is a player that I don't think anyone would disagree is ready to have a breakout season. And that's why our partners at FanDuel have Andrew Nembhard as the preseason favorite to win most improved player. He is currently plus 900 on FanDuel, followed by Denny Avdia, Benedict Mathurin, Amen Thompson, Shaden Sharp, and Modest Buzelis. But Nembhard is definitely the clear-cut favorite, and I think it would take something pretty drastic for it to not happen. Simply the fact that he has been fantastic in the postseason. He's been better in the postseason than the regular season. But now Tyrese Halliburton isn't going to be there this year. And I think the difference between now and in the past, because when Tyrese Halliburton has missed time in the past, we've seen Andrew Nembhard have starts at point guard, but now it's his role long-term as opposed to, hey, he's just coming in and doing it for a couple of games. How high are your expectations for Andrew Nembhard this year? And how much does that actually alter his dynasty value? Because after this year, Tyrese Halliburton should be back. So does that mean Andrew Nembhard is just going to regress back to what we've seen in the past? Or do you think that maybe this is a nice stepping stone for him to actually take a leap that can still be somewhat sustained when Tyrese Halliburton is back?
Over the last couple of seasons, we've seen a pretty consistent, strong trend of when Tyrese Halliburton is not on the floor, Andrew Nembhard's role entirely changes. And you see the scoring production and the assist production jump dramatically. In the 23-24 season, we saw actually a good number of minutes, about 600 minutes of Nembhard without Halliburton on the court. Last year, it wasn't that many because obviously Halliburton was available for the most part during the season until he got hurt right at the end of the NBA Finals. And in that 23-24 season, you saw the points per game per 75 possessions for Andrew Nembhard go up about 4 points per game without Halliburton out on the court, going up to about 16 points per game per 75 possessions, and going from 4.3 assists per 75 to 8.8. So doubling his assist production without Tyrese on the court. That's what we're talking about. And that to me tells you, I don't think people are fully understanding that Andrew Nembhard has a really good chance to average 7+ assists per game this season. And that's going to make a dramatic difference in leagues where assists are going to be a little bit harder to be able to come by in big bunches like that. When you have so many of the big assist producers in the league, whether it's Halliburton, DeJounte Murray, Damian Lillard, even Jason Tatum, who had a big leap in assists last year, not available this year. And you could say, well, oh, those will just go to other players on their team. And to some extent they will, but not to this degree, where there's kind of a one-for-one replacement for what they're going to do. No, Andrew Nembhard is not Tyrese Halliburton. He's not going to be able to do everything that Tyrese Halliburton does, but we do know that he's going to have a big leap in his usage and a big leap in his assist production without Halliburton on the court. You're going to see a drop in the efficiency. That's also a trend that has been really consistent over the last couple seasons. When Halliburton isn't on the court, everyone on Indiana is less efficient because no one is better at quickly getting the ball out to someone who's put in a good opportunity to score than Tyrese Halliburton in the NBA. He operates faster than anybody else does from the point guard position. They're going to miss that. Andrew Nembhard can't entirely replace that, but he's going to have the opportunity to replace as much of it as he can, and that's going to create a huge opportunity. But to what you said before, this is not going to hold. I think Tyrese Halliburton is going to come back pretty close to himself in the 26-27 season, and after that, it's going to look a lot of the same from Andrew Nembhard, who I still think can be an ascendant player. I think he can get better, but it's going to be that big drop-off again because his role just will not be the same with Halliburton back. We know that his role with Halliburton is to be able to be more of a defensive combo guard. And yes, he can, when you don't have Halliburton on the court, have that bigger assist role. I think there's also a future where TJ McConnell isn't on this roster. because of his age, that eventually Nembhard could kind of have those McConnell, like spark plug minutes for where we get the Nembhard show instead of the McConnell show during that time. That could be part of Andrew Nembhard's future, but it's really going to be a big short-term production boost if you're a contender. Use that short-term production to be able to win your league, get those big assist totals. And if you are a rebuilding team who rosters Nembhard, like we've talked about with a few different players this season, this is your opportunity to be able to sell high on production that is not likely to continue, as I think Andrew Nembhard is going to be an Indiana Pacer for a long time going forward. And I think Tyrese Halliburton is going to be available to be the starting point guard of the Indiana Pacers for a long time going forward, just not this season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think maybe we could see him, just looking 2 years ahead. He averaged 10 points, 3.3 rebounds, 5 assists per game this past season. Maybe he's like, okay, he's had this really nice season. Now he has more confidence. They feel more confident in him. So maybe he gets to like 12 or 13 points. Maybe he hovers around 5 assists, something like that, where it's not too much of a difference, but it's a little bit of improvement because just the general outlook of him as a player is a little bit better. As far as maybe him being less efficient this year or the entire team being less efficient, I think it's maybe not going to be quite as bad as it was in the past, because I think there's a difference between, hey, we're in the middle of the season, Tyrese Halliburton's missing a game or he's missing 5 games and we have to figure things out, versus going into the season with a game plan saying, hey, we don't have Tyrese Halliburton this year. So maybe it will be a little bit better from a team perspective, as far as just being a little bit more efficient than maybe it was in the past when Halliburton wasn't there. But as far as Nembhard, 1.7 turnovers per game last year, I'm expecting that to definitely go up along with the assists, but definitely will go up. Got a few more guys to talk about here. Next up will be Jalen Green, who's now in Phoenix after a number of seasons in Houston, was sent there as part of the Kevin Durant trade. And I think that this is a pretty good opportunity for him, even if the situation is maybe the most ideal. It's a good opportunity for a fresh start for him. I think that he's still obviously a very talented player, a talented scorer who's only 23 years old. And I think a lot of people have basically written him off at this point because of the amount of frustrating years in Houston. The Rockets are ready to contend for championships. The Suns are not. So maybe this is a good spot for Jalen Green to continue to develop as a player. Learning from Devin Booker, observing Devin Booker and how he operates could be good for him. Are you optimistic about this being a good spot for Jalen Green?
This is another one of those, we got to see what we have here, kind of situations with Jalen Green, because there is discussion that he's going to be the starting point guard for this team. I think that's just kind of in name only. They did this before with Bradley Beal and Devin Booker, where they said Bradley Beal is going to be the starting point guard. That happened when Bradley Beal came over to the Phoenix Suns. What didn't happen was Bradley Beal playing point guard for the Phoenix Suns. It is going to be Devin Booker. Devin Booker is a much better playmaker passer than Jalen Green, and he's going to have the ball in his hands more than Jalen Green. But if you look at kind of preseason projections, Basketball Monster has Jalen Green jumping up to 5.3 assists per game, which would be a huge leap forward. From a per 36 perspective, this would be him going up from about 4 assists per 36 minutes up to 5.5 assists per 36 minutes. I don't see that happening, and I get it. And I understand where Basketball Monster is coming from on this, that there is a real void of other playmaking on this team beyond Devin Booker. When you get beyond that, you're talking about the Colin Gillespies and Jared Butlers of the world. And it's difficult to be able to see who is going to be distributing the ball in this team if it's not Devin Booker or Jalen Green. So I could see an uptick in the assists per game from Jalen Green. But having watched Jalen Green on the Houston Rockets, we've only had a couple stretches of his career where he suddenly seems to have anything other than tunnel vision on his drives. And he is super athletic, explosive. He has all the tools to be a star NBA shooting guard, but there's a reason that it never fully came together for him, because he does not process the game offensively at the level where he's seeing the whole chessboard. And he's not going to make the reads that he needs to be able to make. Now, Devin Booker at one point was thought to be that player too. And early in his career, we thought of Devin Booker as kind of the empty calorie, not a winning player kind of guy that we view Jalen Green as. And that doesn't mean that Jalen Green's going to be able to do it, or that Devin Booker's necessarily going to mentor Jalen Green into being that guy. But it can't hurt for Jalen Green to be able to be around a guy who transformed himself into a non-defender, kind of a guy that was viewed as a non-passer, just kind of a, I'm going to get my stats kind of guy, having a 70-point game and, holding up the Wilt Chamberlain sheet with his teammates. Like that kind of player became a guy who makes the NBA Finals, kind of models himself against as a Kobe Bryant, is on the Olympic team playing a role of being a defensive player and knocking down catch and shoot threes and putting the team before himself. That's who Devin Booker has become. And I think people were wrong in the way that they pegged Devin Booker early in his career, but we do this a lot with young scoring guards. So I'm open-minded to the idea that Jalen Green is not a finished product at such a young age. But I'm also mindful of the fact that Houston was willing to just kind of get rid of him as the salary filler of this deal to be able to get off of the contract extension that they had signed. With that said, from a dynasty perspective, there's short-term opportunity and there's going to be long-term opportunity on this Phoenix team, because I don't think they're going to be able to trade him unless they're going to be having to move off of the deal by giving up assets to be able to move it on to someone else's roster. They don't have assets to be able to do that. They need, because they are stuck in we don't have control over our own first round picks situation for a long time going forward. They need to just try to be competitive. Matt Ishbia wants to be. So Jalen Green's going to play big minutes. I think he's going to play, he could play minutes all the way up to 34, 35 minutes per game on this team. He could score 22 points per game on this team. The assists could come up a little bit. He could hit a lot of threes. There were holes in the fantasy stats that we did see the rebounding improve last year. You could see the free throw percentage to be able to hold at a level where it maybe even gets to the point where it's not even, neutral. It could creep up to being actually helpful to you in the low 80s. That's possible. Those are the areas of improvement that we could possibly see. And I think he's going to get multiple seasons of this in Phoenix where he has a huge role. It might be with Devin Booker. It might eventually not be with Devin Booker if they decide that, or Booker decides that he wants to be able to move on now that he got this new contract extension in future seasons. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see Jalen Green and Devin Booker as the starting backcourt, not only this year, but next year, maybe even another year after that. So if you are looking to be able to get the kind of production that Jalen Green produces, I think you're going to see a lot of it over the next few seasons, because he's got a huge runway of opportunity in Phoenix.
Yeah, it'll be a nice opportunity for him. Not super confident that it's going to result in him maybe achieving the level of production that pre-draft some people maybe had the expectation that he would reach. But definitely a good spot for him to kind of maybe fix his image around the league a little bit. We'll see if the Suns, like you said, if they're going to be able to eventually move him, or if they want to eventually just like keep him and have him be part of their future. There's going to have to be some sort of, he increases his value so that they're not having to trade him and attach assets to get off of the contract. Maybe this will be kind of a nice opportunity for him to build his value back up and they move him, or maybe they feel good enough about it that they keep him around and we see a lot of points. And hopefully we'll see an improvement in efficiency and see him develop in some other ways as well. The last player that I want to talk about is a guy who was excellent down the stretch of last season, and I question whether that means anything. It's a player that still hasn't been signed yet, and that is Quentin Grimes, who was fantastic down the stretch for the for the Sixers last year. In a game against the Hawks, I love George Niang's trash talk. I think it's always really funny. It basically said like, hey, next year when Max is back, you're going to be sitting in the corner. When Embiid's back, you're going to be sitting in the corner. And I'm like, I mean, he's kind of not wrong. Like when this team is fully healthy, is Quentin Grimes starting? Is he coming off the bench? And does he really get to shot create? Now, when he did have the opportunity this past season, there was some very, very, very fun games, some huge scoring performances from him. But now that everyone's healthy, are we going to see anything close to that this upcoming season? I think to me that improves my overall value of him, because I've seen him do this and I've seen him produce at this level. But maybe I'm not super optimistic about this upcoming season from him, just because I don't think they're going to ask him to do anything like what he did down the stretch of last season.
Quentin Grimes is a great case of where you need to understand the full backstory of some of these players to be able to kind of understand what their career trajectory is and kind of what they view themselves as and why their career has gone the way that it has. With Quentin Grimes, this was a big time, a high school level recruit. He was viewed as kind of a potential star young player coming up through the college ranks, ended up kind of having his career weave around in different directions. And and ended up kind of looking like, okay, well, maybe he's going to be more of a role player in the NBA. And in his rookie season, he showed quite a bit for the New York Knicks. His second season, he starts nearly every game that he plays in for the New York Knicks. And it looks like he's going to be kind of this, really great defensive role player who can, shoot the three enough, average 5.7 3-point attempts in 30 minutes per game. The efficiency was even there in his second season, 38.6%. I mean, everything was there for him to be a 3-and-D guy who had a really long career, made a ton of money, and he didn't stay in New York after that. They ended up trading him, by the 23-24 season. He goes to the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons take a look at him, and even lacking in anybody to be able to take on that 3-and-D role, they, at that time in the Pistons rebuild, they say, no, thanks. We're not interested in signing you long-term and keeping you long-term. He ends up in Dallas. Dallas takes a look at him. He does some interesting things for the Mavericks as well. They move on from him and send him off to the Philadelphia 76ers. And the reality of what we heard is that basically at all of these different turns, Grimes wanted big money and he wanted a bigger role. He wanted to be able to be the star player that I think he thought coming up in his career before he got to the NBA that he was going to be. And it's seemingly in this protracted standoff with the Sixers where I think at this point it's pretty clear what money the Sixers can offer to him. They have made there is not someone else coming in to be able to take him, and yet he's not taking it. And this is a guy who hasn't really made real money in his NBA career, and there's real money around the mid-level exception for him to be able to make here, and it hasn't happened. And that lack of commitment makes me not only worried about where his career is going long-term, but it makes me worried about where it's going this season, because even if, like I expect him to, he eventually signs a contract, and whether it's a short-term or long-term contract, he's going to be in Philadelphia at least to start the season, I think. Because there's just lack of other options for him to go anywhere else at this point. And I think he lacks in options. He's eventually just going to have to do it. But even at that point, this is a guy who I think is going to have minutes in the mid-20s. I don't even know if he's going to start for sure. I think there's going to be a decent chance that the Philadelphia 76ers are going to want to put VJ Edgecombe out there immediately. He might start immediately for them. I think they're very high on him. And I think they rightfully believe that guys like Jared McCain and VJ Edgecombe are their future, and that Quentin Grimes could be a part of that future, but it depends on him being willing to take on a role that is commensurate to his talents and strengths. And he doesn't seem to want to do that. He seems to be want to be the guy that he was when the Sixers were tanking down the stretch. And I get that. He can do that in Mickey Mouse March, but he's not going to be able to do it in October and November when teams are at full strength. He's not going to be that guy, but he seems to think that he is. And I don't know him, but that's every indication that we're getting from him. So unless he's willing to be able to take on that role, I don't think it's going to work out in Philadelphia long term. I think he's going to be pushing around to other teams, and he has enough value because he's a good player to be able to continue to get opportunities in the league, but it's never going to ascend to that big minute starter level until he would accept to be that 3-and-D role player that he should be. So I'm out on Quentin Grimes for this season. I think that, yeah, he could start 25 to 27 or play 25 to 27 minutes a game. He might start at points, but I don't think that's enough minutes for him to be able to be super productive. Both Hashtag and Basketball Monster have him projected as a outside of the top 150 per game player. And he's going to be moving down for me in Dynasty rankings because I think he had an opportunity here to be able to cement himself as the player that they needed next to Tyrese Maxey in the starting lineup. I think VJ Edgecombe is going to be able to take that pretty quickly. And I don't expect, maybe Grimes is going to be able to play some minutes at the 3 as well, but I don't see a big enough role here for him to be able to make a big fantasy impact. He's not a guy that I'm looking to invest in long term. If he does sign this contract and you get some production from him early on and you roster him on your team, I'd be looking to move off of him because I don't see this story ending any differently than it has at his 4 different stops at the NBA so far.
Yeah, wow, that's a hefty statement on Quentin Grimes. I think it is pretty interesting that he hasn't signed yet, and they didn't let other players like a Gershon Yabusele just straight up walk, just so they could potentially keep this in play to pay Quentin Grimes. Assuming he'll be back in Philly, but it's probably not going to be anything like what we saw last season, and we'll see if he is okay with that. But that's going to do it for this episode. We just kind of talked about the Dynasty outlook of 10 different guys. Matt, before I let you go, what content do you have on the way that we can be on the lookout for?
Well, we finally have filled almost all of the Dynasty leagues that I run. So it's turning back to Dynasty rankings, getting rankings for the 25-26 season for redraft together, pulling that together right now. So there's going to be a lot of content coming up at patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. Check me out on Twitter to be able to get links to my content. And we're going to be able to give you rankings that I think every year produce more Dynasty breakouts than anybody else. We're going to be talking about that on here in the coming weeks, but I make an effort to be able to find guys and be ahead of people on guys and have them ranked well ahead in Dynasty rankings where the consensus is that I believe in. And we've got a really good track record, especially in the ranking sets that come out in August, September, and October, of being able to mark those guys year after year, the Jalen Johnsons of the world. Like the last season, to be able to say, I think Jalen Williams is going to be a guy that should be in the top 15 of Dynasty rankings, when he had kind of been lingering as a guy as a top 25 guy. And I got a lot of pushback on that. And we had that kind of productive season. Putting a marker on Amen Thompson to be able to say, this is going to happen this season. That's something we did in August. I was on Dan Vesper's show, and I flagged Denny Avdia. I flagged Jalen Williams. I flagged Amen Thompson. We do the work so we can make these predictions ahead of when anyone else is going to get them. I hope to be able to provide that for you all this year. I've definitely got some ideas of some of the guys that I think are going to make that big leap this year that you should be targeting now. We'll be talking about that on my Patreon channel. We'll also be talking about that on here going forward. Noah, thank you for having me on. I've been loving doing these shows with you.
Of course, Matt. It's always a ton of fun just to be able to do this. It's kind of like a weekly check-in that we'll hopefully be able to do all season long. It is officially the preseason. There's no longer off-season content. It is preseason content, which is one of the most fun times for us fantasy content creators, because we can talk about the Dynasty stuff still. We can also talk about just this upcoming season and really dive in to that type of stuff with mock drafts, with rankings. There's going to be so much content on the way. Definitely give Matt a follow at NBA Dynasty ADP and check out his Patreon to get that first exclusive look on the guys that he has as breakouts for this upcoming season. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast, which is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network, part of Believe Network, and brought to you by FanDuel. We will see you guys next time.